Imagine boarding a luxury resort in Miami. The advertisements promise relaxation, freedom, and, this all-inclusive escape from the daily grind.
Right, the perfect getaway.
Exactly. You step onto the polished teak deck, someone immediately hands you a frosted glass of champagne. The sun is shining, and a steel drum band is playing in the background. It is the picture-perfect, deeply relaxing vacation.
Yep, the dream.
But the thing is, the moment those heavy mooring lines are thrown off and that ship leaves port, you cross an invisible threshold.
You really do.
You are no longer just a vacationer. You have entered a floating jurisdiction meticulously designed around tax avoidance, liability limitation, international labor arbitrage, and environmental exemptions.
It's wild when you put it like that.
Right. The vacation remains highly visible, but the underlying system completely disappears.
Totally vanishes.
Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. Today's deep dive explores the exhaustive research found in the book Cruise Ship Blues by Ross A. Klein.
And I want to state clearly right at the top of our conversation today, this is not a travelogue.
No, definitely not.
And it is certainly not a simple book review. This is a systems-level analysis of the global cruise industry.
We're looking at the architecture beneath the aesthetics. To do this properly, we are relying on Klein's extensive sociological research, which digs deep into federal legal cases, U.S. Coast Guard enforcement records, maritime labor union surveys, and, well, his own firsthand experience.
Yeah, he spent over 300 days at sea.
Which is an incredible amount of time to spend observing, analyzing, and documenting the underside of an industry that spends like $500 million annually on advertising just to maintain this very specific, very polished facade of carefree luxury.
$500 million is a lot of money to keep a secret.
It really is. And the mission of this deep dive is precisely to challenge the assumption that cruise ships are simply floating hospitality resorts providing affordable family vacations.
Right, because they are so much more than that.
We are going to reveal the deeper structural claim here, which is that modern cruise ships function as heavily optimized floating economic zones.
They are engineered around regulatory arbitrage, captive market economics, and massive cost externalization.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to invite you, the listener, to really look behind the curtain of the Love Boat myth with us. Let's start with the illusion itself versus the economic reality, because if we want to understand the invisible system, we first have to understand how the cruise line actually funds this massive operation.
The evolution of the industry's own marketing gives us the perfect roadmap for that, honestly.
Oh, totally.
If we look back at the late 1970s and 1980s, the marketing was largely concrete, it was tangible. Cruise lines sold the physical ship, the specific facilities, the sheer abundance of food.
Right. Think of the original Love Boat television show.
Exactly, which aired from 1977 to 1986. It created this indelible cultural image. You had the socially affable captain dining with guests, the incredibly spacious cabins, the leisurely, open-ended dining hours with live bands and dance floors.
And a well-paid, all-American crew mingling effortlessly with the passengers.
Right, that was the vibe they sold. But Klein actually sailed on the original Love Boat, the Pacific Princess, back in 1997.
Oh, wow.
And the contrast he describes between the television fantasy that sold the industry to the American public and the physical reality of the ship is staggering.
I can only imagine. On television, the cabins look like standard, sprawling hotel rooms with queen-size beds and seating areas.
Right. But in reality, Klein's cabin was 130 square feet.
Wait, 130 square feet?
Yeah, for context, that is roughly the size of a single parking space.
That is incredibly small.
It had a bathroom the size of a small closet, and he was sleeping on a twin bed so narrow his feet hung over the edge.
So not exactly luxurious.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the dining wasn't a leisurely, flexible affair where you wandered in when you were hungry. It was rigidly scheduled, assigned seating. You ate at 6:00 p.m. or 8:00 p.m. at a table with strangers, with zero room for a romantic dance floor between the tables.
The industry quickly realized that selling concrete physical amenities was a losing battle, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. As the corporation started scaling up the size of the ships to carry thousands of passengers rather than hundreds, physical space became an absolute premium.
Right. You cannot promise everyone a massive suite and a private dance floor when you're trying to pack 3,000 people onto a single hull.
Exactly. So in the mid-1990s, they fundamentally shifted their psychological strategy. Norwegian Cruise Line pioneered this with their It's Different Out Here campaign, which actually won numerous advertising awards.
Oh, I remember those commercials.
They moved away from selling concrete amenities to selling abstract, emotional expectations.
You rarely saw the inside of a cabin in those ads. It was all slow-motion footage of couples looking at the sunset or people laughing. It's like Carnival's The Fun Ship trademark or Celebrity's tagline, exceeding expectations.
The brilliance of emotional advertising is that it is highly individualized and completely unquantifiable.
Right. An emotional promise is purposely vague enough that the consumer fills in the blanks with their own ultimate fantasy of relaxation or adventure.
But consider the logistical impossibility of that promise. How can a single hospitality company realistically promise to exceed the unique, deeply personal expectations of 3,000 totally different people trapped on a single voyage?
It's impossible. A retired couple from Ohio expects something entirely different than a group of 20-somethings on a bachelor party.
Exactly. They cannot possibly exceed all those expectations. But the emotional appeal successfully bypasses rational calculation and gets the consumer on board.
And getting them physically on board, past the gangway, is the entire linchpin of their corporate revenue extraction system.
That is the whole game.
Let me push back on that a second, or at least try to reframe it. When people book these trips, there's this pervasive myth of the all-inclusive vacation. People see these artificially low ticket prices, like $399 for a 5-day cruise, and think, wow, what a bargain. My hotel, my food, my travel is all paid for.
Right, it feels like a steal.
But that low ticket price isn't a bargain. It's a deliberate mechanism to get you through the door. It's the classic razor and blades model.
Right, it's a great way to look at it.
Or like buying a printer dirt cheap, but you're forever trapped buying their wildly expensive ink cartridges. Except in this scenario, the printer is a 100,000-ton floating city in the middle of the ocean, and you literally cannot walk out of the store to find a cheaper cartridge.
The razor and blades concept is the perfect foundation for understanding this, but the cruise industry takes it into the realm of captive market economics.
Captive market economics, that makes so much sense.
In this ecosystem, the initial ticket price is often heavily subsidized. It might just cover the operational baseline, fuel, basic food supplies, and the rock-bottom labor costs we'll discuss later.
So the ticket just gets the ship moving.
Exactly. The true profit engine of the corporation is onboard revenue. According to the financial data analyzed in the book, passengers are mathematically expected to spend roughly 1/3 of their entire ticket price all over again once they're physically on the ship.
1/3. That's a huge margin.
The pressure from investors to increase this number is immense. When Carnival and Star Cruises were in a bidding war to take over Norwegian Cruise Line, Wall Street analysts actually criticized Norwegian because their onboard revenue was only averaging between $220 and $233 per person per day.
Wait, $233 a day? Per person.
Per person.
That is staggering. If a family of 4 is on a 7-day cruise, Wall Street expects them to drop thousands of dollars on top of the cruise fare. How are they extracting that much cash from an audience that thinks they already paid for an all-inclusive trip?
Through an absolute masterclass in psychological conditioning and environmental design.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Let's look at the specific mechanisms of extraction, starting with the bars. Historically, back in the 1970s, a mixed drink on a cruise might cost 35 to 50 cents. It was considered an amenity, a perk of the voyage.
Right, part of the all-inclusive feel.
Today, that same standard drink is 7.50 cents, $10 or more. And the extraction begins the absolute second you step foot on the ship.
I know exactly what you mean. Think about the last time you boarded a ship or even attended a high-end resort. Klein describes how passengers are offered a beautifully presented, seemingly complimentary drink from a silver tray the moment they cross the gangway.
It feels like a welcoming gift.
It totally does. But immediately after you take a sip, the smiling server produces a receipt pad and asks you to sign a slip for your shipboard account.
Which is such a brilliant trap.
Right. Most people are too embarrassed or too caught off guard to hand a half-drunk glass of champagne back and argue over a few dollars, so they just sign it. It's not hospitality. It's an immediate, calculated activation of your spending reflex.
Okay, it shatters the illusion that your wallet is put away for the week. It establishes a behavioral pattern of microtransactions for the rest of the trip.
And then what happens?
Then you have the sail-away parties on the top deck. The ship leaves port, the music blasts, and waiters aggressively push watered-down pre-mixed drinks in bright plastic cups.
The classic drink of the day.
It's exactly. Sold in a branded souvenir glass, which provides an excuse for a massive premium markup.
But perhaps the most fascinating example of engineering passenger behavior for sheer profit is the evolution of the theme night.
Oh, the theme night is a perfect distillation of how these companies optimize human behavior.
Walk us through the country and western line dancing example from the book because it blew my mind.
Sure. So a major cruise line analyzed their late-night food operations. Traditionally, they hosted a midnight tropical fruit buffet. It was elegant, but fruit is relatively expensive, and passengers tended to grab a plate and head back to their cabins to sleep.
Right, they get their food and leave.
So the corporate revenue managers replaced the elegant fruit with a country and western-themed buffet serving cheap chili and hot dogs.
A massive downgrade in food costs?
Exactly. But crucially, they introduced line dancing alongside the food. By teaching line dancing, they kept passengers lingering in the lounge area far longer than they would have if they were just grabbing sliced pineapple.
Because they lingered, they got thirsty from dancing.
And because they were thirsty, they drank more alcohol.
So they manipulated the social environment to increase the time on site for the bars. What were the actual numbers on that? I know the book breaks it down.
They do. That single change increased bar revenue by $1.10 per passenger per night. On a 2,000-passenger ship sailing 50 weeks a year, that translates to an extra $110,000 in drink sales annually.
Wow.
Furthermore, because a Western buffet of chili and hot dogs is significantly cheaper to procure than fresh, exotic tropical fruit, the ship saved $50,000 in food costs.
So they cleared $160,000 a year per ship just by changing the background music and downgrading the snacks.
It's pure optimization.
Multiply that by a fleet of 20 ships, and you're looking at millions of dollars in pure profit generated simply by manipulating crowd flow. But bars are just the beginning of the extraction. The casinos have evolved drastically, too.
Oh, immensely. Historically, a ship's casino was an afterthought. You might find a tiny windowless room with 20 slot machines and maybe a single blackjack table. It was a diversion.
Right, something to do if it was raining.
Today, the casino is the architectural centerpiece of the vessel. We are looking at multi-story Las Vegas-style casinos with hundreds of machines. And they don't just rely on degenerate gamblers. They use highly sophisticated tactics to trap absolute novices.
How so? I mean, if I don't gamble, I just walk past it, right?
Well, they design the ship so you can't easily walk past it. The main thoroughfares often force you to navigate through the flashing lights and sounds of the casino to get to the dining room or the theater.
Oh, so you have to walk through the temptation.
Exactly. And once you are in that space, they offer free champagne on the first night to systematically lower inhibitions. They host free gaming lessons in the afternoon when the casino is quiet, handing out match play chips that seem like free money.
It's designed to convert passive observers into active, novice gamblers.
Precisely. Klein observed one man lose $500 in under an hour just trying to learn the rules of roulette during one of these friendly sessions.
That is rough. And when you finally get off the ship to explore a port, you think you've escaped the perimeter. But the extraction doesn't stop.
Not at all.
Let's look at the shore excursions. When I buy a ticket to go snorkeling or see Mayan ruins, I assume I'm paying the local economy.
Most people do.
But the markups here are staggering. The book notes that a shore excursion ticket sold to a passenger at the ship's tour desk for $60 only yields about $15 to the actual local operator driving the boat or the bus.
The cruise line and their corporate concessionaires pocket the massive difference simply for acting as the middleman.
And the extraction extends deeply into the independent shopping at those ports, too. Cruise lines employ port lecturers.
Right. These are the cheerful staff members who give supposedly objective, helpful talks in the main theater about what to see and do in the next destination.
Passengers attend these talks believing they are getting insider travel tips.
In reality, these lecturers are often receiving direct kickbacks. They steer passengers to specific, corporate-approved stores.
I always wondered how they enforce that. I mean, if I get off the ship in St. Thomas and walk into a jewelry store, how does the cruise line legally take a cut of an independent transaction? How does the store even know I came from that specific ship?
It's a closed-loop tracking system. The port lecturer gives you a VIP shopping map or special coupons. When you present that coupon or show your cruise ship room key to get a special discount, the store records your purchase.
Ah, so that's the trigger.
Yep. At the end of the month, that local store wires a commission back to the cruise line's corporate office. The stores paid dearly for this privilege. In 1994, an upscale store in St. Thomas paid as much as $700 per port call just to be listed in the promotional materials distributed to passengers.
Then if they don't pay?
If they don't pay the kickback, The port lecturer will actively warn passengers that the store is unsafe or sells fake goods.
That sounds almost like a shakedown.
The cruise line monetizes your attention and your geographic movement, even when you are walking around a sovereign nation.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate geographic monopoly, the private island.
Oh, the private islands are brilliant from a revenue standpoint.
Cruise lines buy or lease entire islands or peninsulas in places like the Bahamas or Haiti. It is framed in the brochures as an exclusive, pristine beach day reserved solely for the ship's guests. But structurally, what is actually happening here?
Structurally, the private island is the absolute perfection of the captive market. On a private island, the cruise line captures 100% of consumer spending.
There are no local taxi drivers, no independent restaurants, no local vendors to compete with.
Every single pina colada, every snorkel rental, every beach chair, every souvenir t-shirt goes directly to the corporate bottom line. There is zero revenue leakage.
It's incredible.
Furthermore, stopping at a private island halfway through the itinerary allows the ship to travel at much slower speeds between major ports. Running the massive marine engines at slower speeds saves the company an astronomical amount of money on fuel.
So it is a dual economic win for the corporation. They slash operational costs while maximizing extraction, and it's all disguised as an exclusive luxury amenity for the consumer.
Okay, so we've established the architecture of extraction. The cruise line gets you on board with a low ticket price, creates a manufactured environment to break down your spending inhibitions, and then systematically drains your wallet through overpriced drinks, casino traps, marked up excursions, and walled garden private islands.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Now that we understand how they generate billions of dollars in revenue, we have to look at how they protect it.
Because a multi-billion-dollar revenue stream is an incredibly attractive target for national tax authorities, labor unions, and environmental regulators.
Exactly. The cruise industry pairs its brilliant corporate revenue extraction with a highly fragmented maritime legal strategy to absolutely maximize profit. We are transitioning from the economics of the casino to the legal fiction of flags of convenience.
I need to play devil's advocate here because the legal setup is totally counterintuitive. You have these massive corporate entities, Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, and they are headquartered in shiny office towers in Miami, Florida.
Right. Their top executives live in America.
Their stock is traded publicly on the New York Stock Exchange. They board predominantly American passengers at American ports like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Galveston.
This is what the book refers to as beneficial ownership.
Exactly. The true owners and beneficiaries of the profit are in the United States. But if you look at the stern of the actual ship, you won't see an American flag.
You will see the flag of Panama or Liberia or the Bahamas. By the late 1990s, approximately 62% of the world's cruise ships were registered in those three specific countries.
And this has absolutely nothing to do with international pride or maritime heritage.
No, it is a calculated exercise in regulatory arbitrage.
Break that down for me. If Carnival's headquarters are in Florida, how does the IRS just let them put a Panamanian flag on a ship and say, cool, you don't owe us any taxes? Surely there is some physical nexus test for taxation.
It relies on deeply entrenched loopholes in international maritime law, specifically Section 883 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code.
Okay, what does that say?
This code provides a reciprocal exemption. It states that if a foreign country does not tax U.S. shipping income, the U.S. will not tax that foreign country's shipping income.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So a company like Carnival creates a subsidiary holding company incorporated in Panama. The ship is legally registered to that Panamanian shell company. Under international law, a ship flying a foreign flag is legally considered the sovereign territory of that flag state.
So they just say the ship is technically Panamanian.
Therefore, these Miami-based companies successfully step entirely outside of the United States corporate tax system. The U.S. considers the revenue to be generated internationally by a foreign entity.
So they just step right out of the U.S. tax bracket, completely legally.
Completely. And it goes far beyond just corporate income tax. By flying that Panamanian or Liberian flag, the ship bypasses U.S. labor laws, it bypasses U.S. minimum wage requirements, it bypasses the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and it largely steps around stringent U.S. environmental regulations.
The financial incentive to maintain this fiction must be staggering.
Let's look at a specific verified data point from Klein's research. In 1999 and 2000, Carnival Corporation earned profits of approximately $1 billion.
$1 billion.
And on that $1 billion of profit, They paid virtually zero corporate income tax.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. They operate out of American taxpayer-funded ports. They rely on the U.S. Coast Guard for emergency rescue. They carry mostly American passengers spending American dollars. But legally, for tax and labor purposes, they might as well be operating on another planet.
That is the exact jurisdictional void the system relies upon. By deliberately separating the beneficial ownership in Miami from the flag of registration in Panama, the cruise lines create an intentional vacuum of institutional accountability.
They reap all the massive financial benefits of the American consumer market and the stability of the American financial infrastructure.
With virtually none of the civic, labor, or tax obligations that a normal land-based American hospitality company like a Marriott or a Hilton has to bear.
And what's wild is that the ports themselves, the foreign nations they visit, are sometimes complicit in this bizarre incentive structure.
Right. You'd think foreign countries would tax the ships heavily for bringing thousands of tourists to their shores.
But the book outlines a scheme implemented by Panama that is just astonishing. Normally, we think of a ship paying a port fee to dock. A harbor master charges for the use of the pier, right?
Yeah, and the cruise line passes that cost onto the passenger. You see it on your ticket taxes and port fees.
But Panama inverted this entirely with a bounty system. To aggressively attract more cruise traffic away from competitors like Costa Rica or Colombia, the government of Panama started actually paying the cruise lines a bounty.
Wait, so they actually get paid to dock?
Yes, they offered up to $12 per passenger landed at their ports. They subsidized the arrival of the ships.
That is wild.
But here is the brilliant, almost cynical part for the cruise line's accounting department. The cruise line did not drop the port fees for the passenger. They continued to charge the passenger a fee to cover port costs.
So the passenger pays the cruise line, let's say $10, believing it's a mandatory tax to dock the ship. And then the Port of Panama turns around and pays the cruise line $12 just for showing up.
The cruise line double dips. The port fee transforms from an operational expense into pure, unadulterated profit, subsidized simultaneously by the ignorant consumer and a foreign government desperate for tourist foot traffic.
It is a jurisdictional black hole. But this black hole doesn't just protect billion-dollar profits from the IRS. It allows for the total, unapologetic externalization of operational costs.
And the single most significant operational cost for any massive hospitality business is human labor.
Exactly. We've established they pay no tax. But to run a floating hotel with 3,000 guests, you need thousands of workers cooking, cleaning, and serving 24 hours a day. The reality below the passenger deck is where this system gets incredibly dark.
The cognitive dissonance between the luxury experienced by the passenger and the hidden operational costs borne by the workers is severe. Passengers are heavily encouraged by the marketing to assume the staff are enjoying the same wonderful Caribbean cruise they are, just picking up a few shifts to pay for it.
That they aren't.
While the passengers lounging by the pool with a $10 cocktail, the non-tipped service staff below deck, the dishwashers, the laundry workers, the engine room wipers, are enduring brutal Dickensian working conditions.
Break down the actual numbers of a standard contract, because when I read this, I had to read it twice.
We are talking about 10 to 12-month continuous contracts.
Wait, 10 to 12 months straight? Do they get weekends off while the ship is at sea?
0 days off. For up to a year, they work roughly 10 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That is an 80, 90-hour work week every single week for nearly a year at a time.
And because the ship is flying a flag of convenience from Liberia or the Bahamas, U.S. minimum wage laws, overtime laws, and labor protections fundamentally do not apply. Wages for these non-tipped, below-deck staff can be as low as $1.50 an hour.
$1.50 an hour.
In the year 2000, a comprehensive survey by the International Transport Workers Federation found that more than half of all cruise ship workers globally reported a monthly income of less than $1,000. 16% earned less than $500 a month for hundreds of hours of grueling physical labor.
And the demographics of the crew are carefully engineered to reflect global economic inequality. If you walk onto the bridge, the visible authority figures, the captain, the senior officers, are often from industrialized nations: Norway, Italy, the UK, America.
Right, the officers.
But the vast majority of the heavy labor and service work, the people scrubbing the toilets, washing the thousands of sheets, bussing the tables, is done by workers recruited from non-industrialized developing nations. The cruise lines actively exploit transnational labor systems.
What's fascinating here is how the international recruitment system itself acts as a mechanism of psychological and financial control through debt obligation.
Right, because they want these jobs.
These jobs are highly sought after in developing nations. Even at $1.50 an hour, the total take-home pay over a year might equal several years' salary in their home country. It's perceived as a lifeline, a way out of crushing poverty for their families.
But gaining access to that lifeline comes at a steep, often predatory price. Workers cannot just apply online. They have to go through local recruiting agents. And they often have to pay these agents exorbitant fees just for the privilege of an interview.
The book gives some deeply heartbreaking, specific examples of how this debt accrues before the worker even steps on the ship.
It really does. Klein details a Croatian worker who had to pay a local agent a $600 non-refundable fee just to get the contract.
$600.
Then, because he couldn't afford the flight to Miami, the cruise line advanced him the airfare, deducting it from his future wages. He stepped onto the ship on day one before he had served a single meal, already $1,400 in debt to Carnival and his recruiters.
There's another example of a cook from Bombay who paid an agency $2,000 to secure his job. $2,000. That was nearly a third of what he would make during his entire 10-month contract.
This debt structure is absolutely vital to understanding how the system maintains compliance. It effectively creates a bonded workforce. Imagine you are that cook. You are working 14 hours a day in a windowless 110-degree galley. You are sharing a tiny cabin in the hull with 3 other men.
If you face verbal abuse from an officer, if you are forced to work while physically ill, or if you are injured by unsafe conditions, you cannot complain. You are terrified of instant dismissal.
Because the punishment for complaining isn't just losing the job. If they are fired, they are sent home immediately, right?
At their own expense. The book notes that many cruise lines require workers from developing nations to deposit an open, undated return airline ticket with the purser's office upon arrival.
Oh, wow. So they hold the ticket over their heads.
The cruise line holds the ticket. If a worker becomes a problem, if they complain about wages or try to organize a union or report a safety violation, the cruise line simply fires them, hands them their ticket, and puts them on a plane home at the next port.
If that happens in month 2, before they've worked off their initial $2,000 recruitment debt, they return home completely financially ruined.
Paul Chapman's book, Trouble on Board, which Klein cites heavily, points out that supervisors frequently use this exact threat to maintain order. They say, if you don't like it here, you can go home. The workers know it's not an idle threat, and it ensures absolute, unquestioning compliance.
So we have this immense invisible tension between consumer convenience and institutional accountability. The American passenger gets an affordable, relaxing vacation precisely because the worker is trapped in a debt-bonded, unregulated labor system.
But this lack of accountability has a deeply dark side that goes far beyond just long hours and low pay. It extends to severe physical safety and criminal jurisdiction.
When a serious crime occurs on a cruise ship, an assault, a theft, or worse, navigating the jurisdiction is incredibly murky. You have a ship owned by an American corporation, flying a Liberian flag, sailing in international waters, carrying an American passenger and a Croatian crew member.
Who has the legal authority to investigate? Who are the police?
Crimes at sea often fall into a massive jurisdictional gray area. This leaves workers, and honestly passengers too, incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and violence.
The book talks specifically about the alarmingly high incidence of sexual assault and harassment, particularly against female employees below deck.
And because of the severe power dynamics, the isolation of the ship, and the very real fear of losing their jobs and being sent home in debt, reporting of these crimes is incredibly low.
When incidents are actually reported to the ship's authorities, what happens? Do they call the FBI or the Coast Guard immediately?
Rarely. The cruise lines often handle these serious criminal allegations as internal public relations and human resources problems, rather than felony crimes requiring immediate police intervention and independent forensic investigation.
It's horrifying.
The ship's security officers, who are employees of the corporation, handle the initial complaint. Their primary loyalty, structurally speaking, is to the corporation, protecting it from massive liability, delayed itineraries, and bad press.
So they control the narrative.
They control the crime scene, they control the witnesses. The victimized worker is left completely isolated, without an independent legal advocate, without a union representative, and without local law enforcement to protect them.
It is the ultimate terrifying expression of the floating economic zone. The corporation is not just the employer. Out on the open ocean, it effectively becomes the state, the police force, and the judge.
That is chilling. We've seen how the system ruthlessly shifts its operational and human costs onto marginalized workers. Now, we need to explore how it shifts its physical costs onto the planet.
Because despite all the glossy brochures and shiny marketing campaigns, The environmental externalities of moving 100,000-ton steel cities through delicate marine ecosystems are massive. Let's look at the illusion of sustainability.
If you look at the corporate materials of any major cruise line today, you will see a sophisticated environmental PR campaign. Princess Cruises has Planet Princess. Holland America has their Seagoing Environmental Awareness Program.
Royal Caribbean famously branded their efforts as Save the Waves. They place little placards in your cabin asking you to reuse your towels to save the ocean.
They project this carefully cultivated image of deep, responsible ocean stewardship.
But the physical reality of a 2,000-passenger ship is fundamentally at odds with that image. A cruise ship is essentially a floating metropolis with zero connection to a municipal sewer system. The sheer volume of waste generated is mind-boggling.
According to the data in the book, in a single week, a typical mid-sized cruise ship generates 25,000 gallons of oily bilge water. It generates 210,000 gallons of raw sewage.
It creates 141 gallons of highly toxic photoprocessing chemicals, plus dry cleaning fluids, unused medical pharmaceuticals, and tons of solid garbage.
Where does it all go?
For a very long time, the industry's quiet, systemic solution to this massive waste burden was simply to dump it directly into the ocean under the cover of darkness.
The most egregious and thoroughly documented example in Klein's book is the Royal Caribbean dumping case of the late 1990s.
This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lazy deckhand throwing a trash bag overboard. It was a systematic, engineered, fleet-wide circumvention of international environmental law.
I want to go really deep into the mechanics of this case, because when you read the details, you have to stop and ask, why would they risk this? We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar, publicly traded company intentionally dumping highly toxic waste into the very oceans they rely on to sell vacations. Is it just pure cartoon villainy from the executives, or is there a systemic reason this happened?
It is entirely systemic. It comes down to the ruthless mathematics of the incentive architecture. In the bottom of every ship is the bilge. It collects water mixed with heavy fuel oil, lubricants, and mechanical runoff.
Okay.
By law, ships are equipped with an oily water separator, which is a complex piece of machinery supposed to filter the toxic oil out of the bilge water before the clean water is discharged into the sea.
But running and maintaining the separator is incredibly expensive.
Very expensive. The delicate membrane filters inside the machine get clogged easily and can cost up to $80,000 a year to replace. Furthermore, disposing of the separated, concentrated toxic sludge legally at a shoreside facility costs even more money and delays the ship in port.
Okay, so the equipment exists, but it's expensive to run. How did they actually bypass it? Did they just turn it off?
No, if they just turned it off, the U.S. Coast Guard inspectors would notice the filters were clean and the holding tanks were full. The engineers literally rigged a secret bypass pipe.
A secret pipe.
They fabricated a custom hose mechanism that bypassed the expensive separator entirely, taking the raw, highly toxic, oil-contaminated bilge water and dumping it directly into the sea.
And to cover up the crime during port inspections, they meticulously falsified the ship's official oil record books.
They presented perfectly balanced ledgers to the Coast Guard.
The practice was so routine and the ledgers so completely fabricated that the engineering crew casually referred to the official record book using a Norwegian term that translates to the fairy tale book.
A fairy tale book. But wait, break down the chain of command here. Why would the chief engineers physically build a secret pipe to do this? Does the CEO in Miami call down to the engine room and say, hey, I need you to commit a federal felony to save me 80 grand on filters?
The CEO doesn't have to say a word. The institutional system does the dirty work for the executives. The officers on the ship, the captains and chief engineers, receive substantial end-of-the-year financial bonuses based directly on their ability to keep the ship's operational and maintenance costs under budget.
Ah, so there's a direct financial incentive for the crew to cut corners.
Exactly. So the corporation creates a high-pressure environment where saving money on expensive membrane filters directly enriches the crew making the day-to-day decisions. It is a perfectly designed, closed-loop economic incentive to pollute. They save the corporate budget, they get a massive personal bonus, and the ocean quietly absorbs the toxic cost.
And it took a massive, multi-agency federal investigation to finally catch them, largely relying on whistleblowers who were tired of the practice.
Between 1990 and 1994, investigators proved this secret dumping was happening routinely on at least 5 different Royal Caribbean ships.
Eventually, the evidence was so overwhelming that Royal Caribbean was forced to plead guilty to 21 felony counts of dumping oil and hazardous chemicals and lying to the Coast Guard. They paid a record $18 million fine.
$18 million sounds like a massive victory for environmental justice.
It does.
But remember the context we established earlier. Carnival and Royal Caribbean were making roughly $1 billion in profit annually, entirely tax-free.
All right, so 18 million is just a drop in the bucket.
When you are operating at that scale of unregulated revenue, an $18 million fine spread out over half a decade of offenses isn't a deterrent. For a long time, these fines were simply calculated by corporate accountants as the acceptable cost of doing business.
Which perfectly sets up what happened in Alaska. Because if the Caribbean and the open Atlantic were the Wild West of maritime law, the state of Alaska decided to aggressively push back.
The Inside Passage in Alaska is an incredibly sensitive, geographically narrow, and visually pristine marine environment, and by the late 90s it was getting absolutely hammered by the exponential increase in summer cruise ship traffic.
Alaska provides a fascinating, real-world case study in what happens when a local, sovereign government actually attempts to pull back the curtain and monitor this floating jurisdiction. In the year 2000, under intense public and political pressure regarding visible water pollution and smog, the cruise industry reluctantly agreed to a voluntary sampling of their wastewater discharges in Alaskan waters.
Now, 13 ships outright refused to participate in the voluntary test. They simply sailed out beyond the 12-mile legal limit, dumped their raw sewage legally into international waters, and sailed back in.
Of course they did.
But of the ships that did participate in the testing, the scientific results were catastrophic.
The governor of Alaska publicly called the laboratory results disgusting and disgraceful. Let's look at the actual numbers. The book notes that 79 out of the 80 ships monitored had effluent with fecal coliform levels that vastly exceeded federal limits.
In some cases, the bacteria levels were up to 100,000 times the federal standard for land-based wastewater treatment facilities.
100,000 times.
And this wasn't even the black water from the toilets. This was largely the gray water from sinks, showers, and galleys, which historically wasn't regulated nearly as strictly because it was assumed to be mostly soapy water.
In reality, it was a toxic soup of harsh industrial detergents, food waste chemicals, and massive bacterial blooms.
The political fallout from this disastrous monitoring data was swift. It led the state of Alaska to pass stringent, unprecedented new laws establishing the Commercial Passenger Vessel Environmental Compliance Program.
They didn't just ask the cruise lines to do better. They implemented a mandatory $1 per passenger fee specifically to fund independent, state-employed ocean rangers.
These were inspectors who actually rowed the ships to monitor compliance and test the water in real time.
This aggressive legal and physical monitoring forced the industry's hand. To legally comply with these new Alaskan regulations and avoid being banned from the lucrative glacier routes, cruise lines began spending millions to install highly advanced wastewater purification systems on board, specifically the xenon membrane system.
And the xenon system actually works, right? It filters the wastewater to near drinking water purity. The technology exists to solve the problem.
The technology is highly effective. It solves the biological and chemical waste issue almost entirely. But here's the crucial caveat that exposes the underlying systemic logic of the entire industry. The cruise lines primarily install these expensive xenon systems only on the specific ships in their fleet that were assigned to the Alaska summer itineraries.
Let me get this totally straight. They possess the physical technology to stop polluting the ocean. They know it works. But they actively choose only to put it on the ships going to the single state that will legally force them to use it, monitor them physically, and fine them heavily if they don't.
That is the reality. They aren't installing advanced filtration fleet-wide out of a deep corporate commitment to save the waves. They are installing the hardware only where the external financial incentive structure absolutely demands it.
Where avoiding steep fines and preserving access to the lucrative Alaskan market makes the technology financially viable.
Exactly. When those same ships transition to the Caribbean or unregulated international waters for the winter season, the industry largely continues to rely on older, less effective marine sanitation devices, or they simply wait until they are 12 miles offshore and dump the waste legally into the open ocean.
It perfectly highlights the overarching tension of the entire book. The visible experience of a pristine, beautiful glacier cruise depends entirely upon invisible systems of waste externalization.
If the government of Alaska wasn't looking and wasn't forcing them to pay for the cleanup, that waste would still be pouring directly into the Inside Passage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, well, the cruise ship is not an isolated, weird anomaly of the travel industry. To truly understand the cruise industry, we have to pull back the lens.
The cruise ship is a perfect microcosm of much larger global economic forces. What we're really looking at is globalization, international governance, and stateless capital, playing out in miniature on a 100,000-ton steel canvas.
Let's talk about that fragmentation of governance, because this economic activity is operating across multiple sovereign nations simultaneously. Boarding in the U.S., flagged in Panama, hiring in Croatia, sailing to Mexico.
Legal jurisdictions, environmental oversight, and corporate accountability become hopelessly intentionally tangled.
The cruise lines are absolute masters at navigating and exploiting this geopolitical fragmentation. Because they are mobile, they can pit sovereign nations against each other in a race to the bottom. A perfect example of this leverage in Klein's book is the battle over the Caribbean waste disposal head tax.
Oh yes, the $1.50 tax. Walk us through how $1.50 almost caused an international embargo.
In the late 1990s, the island nations of the Caribbean were facing an ecological crisis. The massive cruise ships were dropping off thousands of tons of solid garbage, glass, plastic, food waste at small island ports that simply did not have the landfill capacity to handle it.
They were just overwhelming the local infrastructure.
So, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, backed by funding and research from the World Bank, tried to implement a tiny, standardized $1.50 per passenger environmental head tax.
The entire goal was simply to pool this money to build modern regional landfills and incinerators to safely handle the immense garbage the cruise ships themselves were generating.
$1.50, that's less than a quarter of the price of a watered-down shipboard orange juice. And it wasn't a penalty. It was to build the infrastructure the ships desperately needed to use.
And the industry's response to this tiny infrastructure fee was utterly ruthless. They didn't negotiate. They threatened to completely boycott any island nation that dared to impose the tax.
Seriously? Over $1.50?
Yes. Carnival's vice president of public relations explicitly stated to the press that while $1.50 seems paltry to an outsider, they control their operational costs obsessively. He said, and I quote, "When you allow people to unfairly charge for things, then you open a Pandora's box."
They actively, aggressively fought against making a minimal $1.50 contribution to the physical infrastructure of the very islands their multi-billion-dollar marketing campaigns rely on.
They utilized their mobility to play the islands against each other. They basically said, if Grenada tries to charge the tax to protect its environment, we will simply pull our ships, devastate their local tourist economy, and sail to a neighboring island that agrees to take our trash for free.
So, what does this all mean? We look at the globalization, the flags of convenience, the predatory labor arbitrage, the environmental shell games, the private islands. It means that the consumer, the happy passenger sipping champagne on the Lido deck, is kept in a carefully managed state of manufactured ignorance.
Consumer capitalism works best and extracts the most profit when the friction of reality is completely hidden.
We get to enjoy this affordable luxury only because the true, staggering costs of the operation are being quietly paid by someone else, somewhere else. The oceans absorb the toxic waste, the debt-bonded workers from developing nations absorb the crushing labor costs, and the small port communities absorb the infrastructure and environmental burden.
We have to completely reevaluate everything we've just discussed through a structural lens. We cannot look at the ship as a hotel. We must look at it as a system.
Which brings us to the core thesis of our show today. I have to ask you, the listener, explicitly, what is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis in perception is the fundamental, unquestioned assumption that a cruise line is simply a hospitality company selling vacations. That is what is being misperceived by the public and often by the media.
And what structural layer is hidden beneath that assumption?
Hidden beneath the brightly colored water slides, the midnight buffets, and the Broadway-style shows is a carefully engineered, highly aggressive institutional structure, optimized for total economic extraction and total cost evasion.
Surface interpretation fails completely because looking only at the $499 ticket price, the smiling bartender, and the Save the Waves placards completely ignores the reality of the debt-bonded labor from non-industrialized nations.
It ignores the legal fiction of flags of convenience in Liberia and Panama. It ignores the bypassed oil filters and the $1.50 bullying of sovereign islands.
How does applying a systems analysis change this visibility? What happens when we put on the X-ray glasses?
It allows us to clearly see that the cruise industry is operating a floating, stateless economic zone. It is a system that deliberately, legally shifts its true costs away from the corporate ledger and pushes them onto fragile marine ecosystems, onto marginalized international workers with no legal recourse, onto local regulators, and ultimately onto the captive consumers themselves.
All of this is done while flawlessly preserving the glittering appearance of affordable luxury. It is not just a vacation, it is an absolute triumph of regulatory evasion.
Next time you see a seemingly impossible bargain, whether it's a $299 week-long cruise to the Bahamas, a $5 fast fashion t-shirt, or free overnight shipping on a heavy package, ask yourself who or what is actually paying the rest of this bill.
What invisible system, what hidden worker, or what ecosystem is absorbing the true cost to make this illusion possible?
Crisis in perception is not about telling people what to think. It is about making the systems shaping perception more visible. Because when structural forces remain hidden, meaningful change becomes far more difficult to imagine.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis in perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.